All right, so I just had a couple of little items here. We'll let people join in as they join, if they join. Um, so before I start that though, anybody who's on have any specific burning questions in the wonderful world of solar or in the wonderful world of IT as we were just complaining about, right? Um, okay, a couple of things just in the news here that I thought were interesting to get us started. There was a report from FERC, that's the, I forget what the acronym stands for, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I think. And they were saying that just to compare renewable energy capacity with nuclear energy capacity. So in 2010, renewable energy had 13.71% of the capacity, while nuclear was 9.56. 2015, renewable 17.83 to 9.16. And then 2020, 24.06% capacity for renewables to 8.57%. So basically what we're seeing is, a 10% increase over that last 10 years in total capacity for renewables and a negative 1% for nuclear. So as I've been maintaining since, I think it was around 2012, that nuclear is dead, although I keep hearing podcasts about mini nuclear things, but they're usually people chasing government grants and stuff. It's an industry with a limited lifespan, I would say. So it's a shame, and it's not a shame. I mean, nuclear, when it's working, is a good technology. Problem is, if there is a problem, it can be a terrible technology. So that's the big downside. And most of the reason why nuclear dead has to do with the insurability of any of the facilities. They're simply no insurance company is going to touch it. So they have to be government underwritten for that reason. And they're just not economical. Then I was looking at Biden's infrastructure proposal, his plan from a renewable energy standpoint. And of course, one of the big goals is 100% carbon-free electrical grid by 2035, which very aggressive. I suspect not very practical, but I hope I'm wrong. I could see getting all coal out of the mix by 2035 for sure. I mean, those things are going by the wayside.
Yeah, I'm about shortly.
Yeah, getting all of the gas peaker plants, things like that, out of the grid, I think that's going to be problematic because
Jay, isn't it really going to depend on the battery technology? I mean, unless they get a huge improvement, they're not going to be able to. I mean, I agree with you that in theory you could put plenty of solar panels up and plenty of wind turbines up to generate the power, but unless you can store it overnight or whatever, it seems like that's going to be the real the real obstacle, the real stumbling block.
I think you're probably right there. Of course, there's a certain amount of compatibility between renewable sources when you add in hydro, wind, and solar. So it's not a thing of every time the lights go out, there's no power. But there is the need for some sort of storage for peak demand loads, things of that nature, and also to store excess energy so you're not shutting down your wind turbines or your solar plants when you don't need that power. But most of the storage we've been focusing on is 4 hours or less in duration. That's what lithium-ion batteries are really focused on. So there's not only a need for more batteries, but there's a need for longer-term storage devices, which deal with not only in excess of 4 hours, let's say 12 hours, 24 hours, but really seasonally, how do we go from storing power in the summer to using it in the winter? That's a big, big issue for the grid. And we've talked about batteries in cars as one option. We talked about, hydro, elevated reservoirs for that. There are gravity options, there's compressed air options. And there's also now, of course, the green hydrogen, which everybody's keen on. I don't have much faith in green hydrogen, mostly because of the storage issues. It's just too hard, too expensive to store it. So that becomes an issue, but you're right. And also think about all the stranded assets. You've just invested in a gas power plant that's supposed to last for 40 years. And then 10 years later, they say, well, why don't you just shut that thing down? Well, I'm not going to. I mean, it's still there. I'd lose a lot of money. So there have been some proposals. They call them like cash for clunkers, like they did with the cars.
The Federal Reserve just prints more money. Money's not an object.
Yeah,
okay? But money's no object. I mean,
hey, welcome to the Democratic Party, man. I'm glad you've seen the light, Don. So, I don't. There is some discussion of them just simply paying the utility companies for their, fossil fuel power plants to retire them. Well, then, of course, that leads into a whole bunch of problems, like what about the little towns that depend on these power plants as their economic lifeblood? You're not going to replace it with a solar array. Something's going to happen, but it's going to happen somewhere else. So there are going to be winners and losers there. So, yeah, it's a good goal. It's a good goal. I don't know if it's going to be achievable, but it's like shoot for the stars, land on the moon kind of thing. We'll see where we end up. But I suspect it's going to be a little longer because, that's only, what, 14 years? Yeah, think about 14 years ago. It was, 2004? Who was president? George Bush? So.
Yeah, I think so. And think what your phone looks like then, but this is not electronics. This is heavy industry. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I was living in the same house, and the house doesn't look much different than it did 14 years ago. Still haven't done those dishes. So, okay, there's another big deal, a 10-year extension of the investment tax credit for solar. That's in the proposal. So right now we're at 26%. I tried to look through the literature. I couldn't find anything specific. All I could sort of infer is that the 26% would continue on for 10 years. I didn't hear. Right. Yeah. And there's another big thing there. Oh, another thing about that, they'll extend that to storage. So if you're wanting to install batteries, that becomes part of the investment tax credit option. And then they also allow for direct payment of the investment tax credit, which basically means if you don't take it, you can get a cash refund, is the way I read it.
Let me ask Jay, when you say the storage is now extended, you're just talking for the industrial side? Because I thought on the domestic or on the individual side, as long as you were using it with the array, that it would be qualified.
That it would be included?
I thought so.
I would think so too, but all the articles said this will be extended to include storage. So maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not part of that investment tax credit.
The way I read the law.
Sure. Okay. Well, and you probably know better than the guy writing the article for PC World. So,
but on the other hand, I've got an interest in it. But yeah.
Yeah. No, it makes sense because it's part of your system.
I thought that and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that was an issue on the industrial side, but not on the consumer side.
It could be because there is talk, of course, about just adding storage facilities that would not incorporate any generation facilities. And that would be part of that utility scale production.
That would make more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because
that makes more sense in context, because my reading had been that as long as you were using the batteries to use solar, or wind, that it was part of your system. But on the ITC side, which when they say that, they typically talk about the industrial stuff, because it's a different credit. You get a different credit for individuals.
And then the direct pay will be a big deal in case, you're in a tax situation where you do not owe enough tax to, or let's say you're a retiree on Social Security or whatever, and you want to, it's just considered an overpayment of taxes, and that money would be given back to you in the form of a refund.
And that's probably more for individuals, because ever since the mid '90s, they've had deal structures where you could do wind. They had wind turbines out in Arizona back in the mid '90s where you could basically sell the credit to somebody.
Right, but I guess there was a problem with that market, because I did see a lot of corporations and a lot of larger scale systems saying this cash monetization would free up a lot of investment capital.
It would make it simpler. It takes all the transaction costs out of it, because those are expensive, relatively speaking. I mean, the guys who were doing this were making good money for kind of cookie cutter transactions. They were just putting two people together and then getting a percentage.
Yeah. And one other thing that I couldn't find on that, and I'll get you, Bill, is I couldn't find if they extended that to nonprofits, because if you're not paying any taxes, would you get the cash back on that? And nobody was addressing that concern or that perspective. So, because a lot of people like churches and schools and places like that would be a big deal if all of a sudden they get a 26% cash rebate, as opposed to nothing, So, yeah, Bill, you had something to add?
Yeah, so in lieu of the tax credit, you're suggesting that if you don't owe money, you can get reimbursed, and that's in the infrastructure bill?
That's part of the proposal, yes.
It's called a refundable credit typically.
Yeah, so that would make solar a whole lot more attractive, because a lot of people owe no money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think even corporations, these guys seem to be able to whittle their tax liability down to zero.
Jay, you're reading stuff in the news that is just, propaganda.
Well, that's what the news is, Don. It's propaganda. And because I use social media, it selects out the propaganda I want to hear. So that's how all of this works. And speaking of propaganda, the other thing that sort of cracked my I was going to say boiled my butt or whatever, but anyway, 16 billion in this plan to plug up natural gas wells. So that's one of my pet peeves is these fossil fuel companies. And we ran into this in North Dakota a lot. Go out, drill their wells, and then just walk away from it without any remediation of the site. So then the government's going to come in with a $16 billion plan to clean up the mess that somebody should have cleaned up on their own. And I know that there had been, during the whole fracking boom, a big call, in the early days of this saying, you guys are just going to leave a mess and the government's going to have to pay to clean it up. And they said, oh, no, we're going to require surety bonds in order to ensure that these sites are sealed up. And by the time Congress was done with it, the bond that these companies had to do for each well was $100. So they had to pay a $100 bond. Otherwise, they'd have to spend $1 million to clean up the site. So So it was clearly, I mean, they just forfeit the bond and walk away and leave a mess. So.
Again, in real life, because I just signed off on one of these last week, Ashland started as an oil company in Kentucky, and I just signed off on cleaning up a location where we didn't have, it wasn't our stuff, but a lot of times I've been told by our attorneys that the people who have the surface rights actually pay for it, not the government. So yep. Ashland owned the surface rights. They sold the mineral rights to somebody else. The other people went bankrupt or walked away. In the end, we're cleaning it up so we can sell the property. And it was not our wells, it was somebody else.
Yep. Well, I'm telling you, they're putting $16 billion of government money in to clean up well sites. So
well, I could give you a whole list of stuff they're putting in there that is not reality.
I know. Well, it's funny.
It'd be a whole different list.
I was just walking back through our property over the weekend, and we have some old gas wells that and gas pipe that are just laying around back in the woods, and I was looking, I saw one that looks like an open wellhead, and I was thinking, I wonder if this thing's leaking, but we don't own the mineral rights, so so if we had to clean that up, that's one of those situations where whoever processed it, whoever sold it, neither of them will be responsible for the cleanup because they don't care. I mean, we're the ones who care.
Yeah, a lot of them gone bankrupt.
Yeah, or disappeared. They're dissolved. They're whatever.
Typically, you'd have a separate little company for each set of wells, and those could very well go bankrupt. Yes.
Yeah. Or
be liquidated or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, hopefully we're we find government, I'll agree with Don 100% on this, government manages to kind of screw up everything they get involved with. And hopefully there's enough money in this that if there's $2 trillion, we'll get $1 trillion worth of positive action out of it. That would be a good day. So.
But by that time, $1 trillion will only be worth 500 million or 500 billion.
But on the counter end of that, I will also say that I haven't seen a lot of competency from Verizon or any of these other large corporations I have to deal with either. So it's a bit like government is the most incompetent organization I've ever run into, except for all the others. So it's that.
Only because it's the biggest.
Yeah. And that's an example too of when we talk about. In fact, I just did a radio program, our podcast, When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, if you guys ever see that or are interested. I was talking about peak climate change, and I really feel very positive that like right now is kind of that watershed of peak climate change where we've been progressively getting worse in a lot of these things that lead to these environmental issues. But all these things are aligning at this moment to make that like we're just at the very peak of it, and that it's the downhill slide. Things like the economics of renewable energy versus the economics of fossil fuel. The investment portfolios of large investment managers no longer supporting, the polluting industry, the will of government trying to change its focus on renewable and climate issues and things like that away from how they used to be. So it's like the corporate culture where they're finding goodness and actual value and money in moving towards renewables. All of these things, the electrification of the transportation industry, the greening of some industrial processes, all of these things seem to be coming together all at once to say, okay, we're over the top, now it's going to gradually get better. But the effects of our behavior are going to be pushed 20, 25 years into the future, because it's not a, oh, we fixed the problem today and the effects of it are gone tomorrow. There is a lingering delay, but I feel like we're not going to be we're not accelerating the damage. We're still damaging things, but it's no longer accelerating. Now it's going to begin to decelerate. And
you mentioned last week, and I think you're right, we don't know what the new problems are going to be yet. And I think some of them are made up, like the guy who was on the news who said that the land could be put back after using solar. But on the other hand, you know, a lot of the stuff to make these solar panels, you have to do certain mining, you have to have certain rare mineral stuff. I mean, there's a lot of other issues that are going to come up that we're going to find about later on when the panels are no good anymore. What do you do with them all?
sure.
It's not.
Yeah, I think we see that, like, of course, in the days of the horse and buggy, manure was a huge problem in congested cities, and there were tons and tons of it. Automobile comes along and it solves that problem. You know, in the days when we heated with wood, the deforestation of Europe, terrible environmental problem. Coal comes along, solves that problem. But I don't think the first person who saw an automobile said, you know, you get enough of those, we're going to cause global warming. You know, it's like these
might not
things.
even think that still, you know.
Pardon? Yeah, it's just outside our realm. Yeah, I think we may find that, you know, who knows what's going to happen. I mean, it's like, if we find that we're beginning to generate all of our power from solar, there may be some low frequency, you know, emission from solar panels that no one has seen and no one has measured, and they're not an issue because they're not in concentration enough or whatever. Just like CO2 being given off by or it may be, you know, I've thought about this where 20% of the energy from the sun is absorbed and given off in electricity. If you've removed 20% that would have then been reflected off either as light or as heat, now if you get enough surface coverage, are you not going to begin to cool the surface of the planet? Because what would have been given off as heat is now converted into electricity, and we begin to see a destabilization there. Although the counter argument is, okay, what's the electricity used to, and what form does it ultimately become? Does it become heat when it's finished? Who knows? But I'm just saying, we're not smart enough to know all of the factors, but I suspect anything in concentration is going to cause a problem. And to walk in naively and say renewable energy is the bee's knees and it's going to fix everything is dumb. You know, I mean, it's just, we have to acknowledge our own contribution to the problem, and apologize to the people 50 years from now for everything we just screwed up. You know, so that's.
And they can thank us for all the things we've given them, like computers and houses and, you know, language, and, you know, they the package.
Yeah, and we get into, okay, Bill, I like to get in this debate with people because I'll always say, they'll say the world's going to hell in a handbasket, and I'll say, okay, will you acknowledge that from prehistory to the Middle Ages, there were positive advancements, and that people would have preferred to live in the Middle Ages than in prehistory? And from the Middle Ages to colonial time, were there not advances that people would have preferred, and on the whole, it was a better society? And from colonial time to today, is it not a more comfortable, better society? So do we not, as a human species, make ever slowly positive advancements as we progress through? And is it not reasonable to assume that's not going to continue into the future? And then they say, yeah, but, you know, I say, okay, don't give me the but. Yeah, there's problems. Of course there are. But there's also positives, and we need to acknowledge those as well. So Bill, you had something?
Yes. Y'all are all familiar perhaps with the Keeling curve. They measure the atmospheric CO2 concentration in Hawaii. They figure there's sufficient mixing from all the sources that's a good average value. At some point, you know, we all have these feel-good feelings about the increased percentage of renewable non-fossil fuel energies, but at some point we want to look to a change in the trajectory of that Keeling curve. Yeah. And my question is, I wonder if how much latency there is in that curve. That is, what is it? Is the since it's an average value, whether it takes a year before the decrease in carbon emitters is actually shows up on that concave upward path.
It would probably be more than a year, I think. I mean,
What's that?
It would probably be more than a year if you change the trajectory. It would take well more than a year.
I mean, my uninformed position would be 20 years. I would think that we have a long-term. My feeling is we are now in the global warming world in a resiliency and coping mode, as opposed to how do we stop it from happening. I think that horse has already left the barn, and now we have to figure out how, as a society, we deal with the consequences of our past behavior, and try not to make it worse, which I'm feeling positive. We're fixing that, not through any government action, not through any morality, just through sheer economics. That portion of it is getting better, but it doesn't mean, like I said, I was walking back through our woods. There are a lot of dead and dying trees back there. And a lot of that is directly attributable to climate change. Some is attributable to the emerald ash borer, but I would argue that could also be remotely linked to climate.
Are you going to play that on climate change too?
Possibly. Certainly globalization. That's an issue of bringing in, invasive species and invasive pests. Mm-hmm. But we're beginning to see some diseases in trees, which I assume has to do with the fact that there are changes in our pattern of weather, not long periods of time of below freezing that kills off mm-hmm. parasites and bugs and stuff. So I don't know. It's a complex infrastructure.
We'll have to get into the discussion sometimes about the pre-industrialization up and down of the climate that happened, from the Romans to the Dark Ages, to the modern minimum, and all that stuff too, because there's probably more than just CO2 going on here.
Some of them are longer term, some of them are shorter term. I think it's an irrelevance and a distraction to say who's causing the change. It's better to say the change is here, and how do we deal with it?
If you're going to deal with it, not trying, because people who are trying to cause, people use something as a reason to attack something, to change things they want otherwise. I mean, CO2 becomes stop CO2, but we'll do this other 10 things that really have nothing. We'll have labor laws and other things changed, which really have nothing to do with it, based on CO2. It's just a convenient boogeyman.
Yeah, sort of like voting laws in Georgia.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with voting, security.
It doesn't. And the funny part is, the people who complain about it, their own states have much more restrictive voting laws than Georgia.
Yeah,
so does China. So we'll go to China for the Olympics.
Hypocrisy is basically evenly spread over all political spectrums. So,
I would agree with that.
And I embrace my inner hypocrite. I'm certainly willing to say I like things just because I like them, and if I have to come up with a reason for it, I can be creative. So I can blame anything and anybody. I'm still blaming Obama, for the fact I couldn't find my shoes. So,
giving up on blaming Bush?
You know what? I never really paid that much attention to Bush. I lived in Europe for a lot of that time. So he was just kind of the boogeyman across the ocean. But anyway, anybody have anything? Those were my in the news things. Does anybody have an actual relevant solar question?
Well, there's a not solar, but there is a wind. I don't know if you saw it, Jay. There's a wind seminar later today. Over at Renview.
Yeah, I did see that. I saw that. Yeah. So if people are interested in, that was a small wind too, wasn't it?
I think it was. Yeah. I think
Yeah,
it is, yeah.
it was sponsored by one of those like Vesta or something like that, if I remember right. Small wind manufacturer. So if
Yeah,
you're
it wasn't
if you're interested in small wind, that'd be interesting to see. I attended one of those a while back. It was put on by a guy in Scotland. It was interesting, but it was also a bit irrelevant to my situation because it was really talking about high resources of wind, you know, the coast of Scotland where it's blowing at 40 knots, 20 hours a day kind of stuff. And so they were really talking in things that were too abstract for my situation.
This one is Primus, is what the name of the company is.
Primus, yeah, that's another small turbine generator. Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, I saw a couple of small windmills. I'm traveling through Ohio and Pennsylvania, a windmill in Columbus at an auto dealership, rather significant one. It must have been 150 foot high.
Yeah.
And then one on my route to Pittsburgh. But the question I have, I don't know anything about small wind, and I just wanted to ask: is that like a constant voltage and variable current supply like solar that you feed to a charge controller? Is that the way small wind works? Is it constant voltage? I guess that's my.
Typically, if it is connected to the grid, it's got to have electronics that do match the grid in their output.
Yeah.
They do have what they'll refer to as wild voltage, and that's basically it. It increases and decreases, but then it's got to go through some sort of electronic cleansing device. They typically have two different variable and synchronous and asynchronous generators. And I'm trying to remember, I'm always bad on this, but one of them takes its voltage and from the grid that it's connected to, it somehow taps in. Siggy, do you teach this stuff?
Wind?
Yeah, or generators or motor design or things like that.
No, we do that in electricity.
Yeah, I know one of them will pull the signature. So it has to do with the number of poles and the number of, you know, how you determine what the RPMs will be and stuff. But yeah, I knew it when I taught the class, and then I promptly forget it because it's something that doesn't interest me. And you know, I just know when you hook them up, they work. Typically, but usually, of course, wind is going to be an AC generating mechanism, whereas solar, we're talking about DC electricity, because AC, it's a generator. So the act of it spinning is an AC generating output form. But they do have, like the Primus systems are usually going to be DC output, but that's because they put a, shoot, what's
a rectifier?
No, they've got the term that turns the AC to DC, a rectifier, yeah, in there. So
that's rectifier, yeah.
Yeah. So that's I'm gonna put this in case I lose you guys, because you guys are freezing up on me.
Well, I will have curiosity. I'll research also. The latency of the killer too. I'm curious about that.
Okay, I didn't.
There, you froze.
Yeah, I'm catching you a little bit. I'm trying to change my.
You're moving again.
Okay.
Okay, I'm switching over to the hotspot if I can recognize it.
Change your network.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi.
All right.
They're bringing it to everyone, right?
Okay, there you go. I switched over to a different.
My question is, in this $2 or $3 trillion bill, did you see where they're going to pay for your upgrade to the Wi-Fi to high-speed internet at the university?
That's the theory. And you would have been proud of me, Don, because when my wife brought that up, I said, oh, okay, well, it's a government project, so it'll probably take 8 years. And by the time it comes through, the technology will be obsolete. So, but I did sign up for Starlink. So it's coming through our region. Apparently, they said mid to late 2021. So
Is that satellite?
Yeah, that's the Elon Musk network of satellites. So if anyone has broadband issues like me and is interested in Starlink, you can go on to their website. They said it'll be a first come, first serve kind of thing. You got to pay them a $99 deposit, which I'm sure is funding most of their activity at the moment. and then they'll come back later.
That sounds like Elon Musk. I mean,
Yeah.
I like Elon Musk, but that sounds like how he does most of it. Takes big deposits and keeps working.
Yep.
But Jay, I'm curious, how are you transmitting to them? I get the download from the satellite. How are you transmitting out to them? Are you going by a telephone wire, or do you have like a little mini satellite to shoot stuff up at them, or what?
Yeah, the same way like when we used to have HughesNet, the satellite dish itself is bidirectional. So
Okay.
you receive it and then you send it up. The difference, of course, is with Starlink, they're claiming it will be unlimited download. So there is no throttling. And they're also claiming speeds of 135 megabits per second, which the best we've ever gotten through Verizon is 0.4 megabits per second. So if they underperform, I don't care how much they underperform, it's got to be better. So that'll be interesting. And, I don't know what the latency issues are going to be. We ran into that before, where there's that delay between going and coming, a 3 or 4 second delay. I don't know what weather issues are going to come into play. That'll all come out in the wash, I reckon, but it's got to be better than
better than 0.4 megabytes a second.
Yeah, and we've actually found ourselves saying, well, the sun is shining, so the internet must be bad, or, oh, it's raining, so the internet must be bad. So or the leaves came out on the tree, so we may not get internet. Right. So that's a big issue, though. I mean, I know in our region, access to the internet is huge. Especially in school systems now that require a lot of online training, a lot of online learning. Not having access to the internet is just unacceptable. So how we deal with it, I don't know. Whether it's going to be, because there you run into the corporate issue, right? It doesn't make sense for a corporation to spend $30,000 to run a mile of line for one customer, and it doesn't make sense for the customer to pay $30,000 to get access to the internet.
So I agree with you, Jay, but to be clear, I had 3/4 of a mile run to my house for nothing from Cincinnati Bell. And it couldn't have been more than $1,000. I think that the prices have gone out. They just did it underground. It took the guy maybe 2 hours. He had a special equipment. And I know that's, going to be different in every situation, but it's like the post office. You're going to have to, if you're going to make it like you want, you're going to have to make it a government function, because, the post office runs places that nobody would run a normal postal service to.
Right. I would think that in this world of electronics, the best solution in regions like ours, where you don't have long distances line of sight, would be simply to put short line of sight generators on telephone poles every half mile or whatever. Go with a wireless distribution system as opposed to trying to deal with running cable. It just feels to me, if you can stick a wise camera in your, and buy it for $6, you ought to be able to buy a repeater, you know, and stick them all over the place for relatively reasonable amounts of money. But
maybe they do it different where you're at, but here they pretty much piggyback everything off of the electrical poles.
Yeah, but I mean, and I don't know, you know, what the topology. Oh, well, you're in the hills down there, I would imagine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. If the world were run by me, it'd be different. It'd still be as screwed up, but it would be different, you know. So
Fair enough.
All right. Does anybody have a technical issue before we close it off? In the wonderful world, I've got a class coming up. Yeah, Bill?
I on the road, I saw a number of, I guess, highway signs that were powered by these small wind apparatus through Ohio.
Yep. Yeah, I know they have a lot of those in the little solar and the little wind. I mean, all of those kind of things make perfect sense. Why run, you know, infrastructure to them when they can be self-generating? You know, we see that at construction sites and things of that nature. It's, I think we're going to begin to see that a lot, you know, a lot more just integrated in, almost to the point of invisibility. You know, why not just incorporate the cells into the system and let it have a little powered battery. I know down in Marietta, we were looking at these park bench things. There was a project I was working with, and they now have these little self-contained units, park benches with a little display like a digital billboard that you can put on the back of this park bench with a solar panel as an awning, a bench there, and then phone charging stations and a lithium-ion battery built into the seat. And you can get those, you know, for a couple $1,000. And it's basically a portable billboard with a bench, and looked really attractive.
Do you happen to know the brand? I'd be curious about that.
I could look it up. I don't remember it per se, but yeah, it was a real slick looking thing, you know. So all the city needed to do is just bolt it down into the ground somewhere, and it's all self-contained. They even had them with a little light that could come on, a little LED light to provide that kind of, you know, if you wanted to put a bunch of them around as a path, you know, lighting the path. They were looking at putting these next to the bike path. I know, Chris, you're down in Marietta, right? They're looking down right along the river there.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okie doke. All right. Well, why don't we call it a day, and we'll get back on Tuesday. And if you think of anything solar in the meantime, just make a note of it and we'll bring it up.
Thank you, Jay. That was
Take
good.
care. Bye-bye.